TBCN presents Creating Your Own Job, a new series aimed at providing you with resources and assistance to start your own business. Financial assistance, analyzing the marketplace, marketing strategies, implementing the plan, creating your own job.
Welcome to another edition of Creating Your Own Job series, a series that's devoted to giving you information if you're thinking of starting or expanding your business. We've been doing lots of different programs on this topic, and today we're going to be talking about licensing and the law. I'm Louise Thompson, the Executive Director of Tampa Bay Community Network, where you too can make a show if you'd like to. And with me today are Jennifer Biles, who's the Community Coordinator for Hillsborough County Small Business Information Center. Welcome, Jennifer. Glad you could be with us.
Thank you.
David Ellis, our favorite attorney at law for intellectual property. Welcome, David. Glad you made it over to our side of the bay.
Thank you.
And Joe Datto, who is an attorney with his own firm, Joe Datto, PA. Welcome. Glad you could all be here today. Let's go around and tell people about your different work environments and what you do there. You're with Hillsborough County. What do you do, Jennifer? What do they do in your department?
Yes, I'm with the Small Business Information Center of Hillsborough County, and what we do is we are a place where you can come and anybody that wants to start a business, we can give them free information. We do free business workshops, free business consulting. We're all out in the community as well. We don't just do them in-house. Our workshops were in all areas of Hillsborough County, putting on workshops, how to write a business plan, marketing series, how to just start, the basics. And we are a clearinghouse of information in our office.
And you do a little bit with the law and licensing too.
Yes, we help.
On that.
We have a checklist that kind of takes you through of where to start and how to get licensed with the state of Florida and then with Hillsborough County.
David, how about you and your practice?
I'm an attorney in Pinellas County, in Largo, right in the middle of the county. I do general business and corporate work, but I particularly specialize in intellectual property and technology. I do trademark work, copyrights, patents. I'm a registered patent attorney, trade secrets, internet-related work, cyber law, that sort of thing.
We're going to touch on all of those then. That's a lot of different things.
Right.
Joe?
Yes, I have a sole practitioner office. My office is on Kennedy and McDill in Tampa. I specialize in small business, and I assist folks from everything from what type of business to go into. I assist them in looking at perhaps they want to look into a franchise or they want to start something on their own. I discuss with them what type of entity to set up and, of course, what type of contracts they might need to enter into, whether they want to lease space, buy a location, or how they want to set up the business structure. And I do offer some advice on if they have problems with the business. For example, if they were to get sued or something, I could assist with that.
So let's start with you for a minute then on just starting your business. People will suggest sole proprietorships or partnerships or subchapter S's. Can you give us a little overview of when you do any one of those things?
Sure. Oftentimes I'll have someone come in and perhaps they were laid off, they worked for a company for a long time, or a lot of people have retired from the military and they're looking to get into something new. They'd like to find something to either make a little extra money or focus on it as their main career. And one thing I like talking about is exactly what are you looking to sell? Is it a service or a product? How do you want to sell it? Do you want to sell it, for example, online? Do you want to set up a retail facility? Do you want to lease store space? And then third, what type of entity do you want to set up? Are you going to have partners? Is it just going to be you, yourself, or perhaps a family member? And those are a lot of questions that I like to discuss with them to kind of get an idea of what they're looking to set up. For example, I had not too long ago some folks that wanted to set up a pet store. They were going to specialize in tropical fish. And one thing they wanted to do was to buy directly from the fish farmers, which are in the south part of the county, and then market these fish to collectors. They were sort of rare tropical fish, and they discussed perhaps maybe they really don't want to retail, they'd rather do something online. So we looked into that, what it would take to set up a website, what would be involved there. And those some questions maybe David could answer in that regard. And then other times I've had folks that want to perhaps purchase a franchise. And maybe it's a pizza franchise, maybe it's a sandwich place, and there's a lot to look into there. But as far as the entities go, the most common are either a corporation, and there are two types, or an LLC or a limited liability company form of a business entity to set up. It's the cheapest one to set up, and it's set up through the Department of State, through Tallahassee. It can be done online, or I can do it in the office. And to have a corporation, we need to know, how are you going to own the corporation? Is it going to be just the client? Is it going to include the client's family member? And even though it's not a huge corporation, or not Google or General
Facebook.
Motors.
Or Facebook this morning.
At least not yet, or Facebook,
All
certainly.
right.
It still has to have a corporate structure very similar to a larger corporation. There has to be a president, a director, board of directors. One person can be everything. One person can be the president, vice president, secretary, treasurer, and director. Or if they want to bring a partner in, or another person, they could serve in that role. And then, of course, again, even though it's not General Motors or Google, still the fact is you have to issue shares. So that's a percentage ownership. So in other words, one person, Frank from the tropical fish example, he can be the 100% shareholder, or he can bring in his brother Joe. So now Frank is a 50% owner and Joe is a 50% owner. And then they both own the corporation in equal halves, and they can contribute in equal shares. Sometimes I don't necessarily recommend that. Sometimes I recommend that if Joe is going to be the main operating the business, then perhaps he should have 51% and brother Frank should have 49%. That way at least someone can make a decision that's binding on everyone. And getting into the corporations, if we just have one brother is going to be the owner, he's not going to bring his brother, and he can do what's a Chapter Sub S corporation, which basically that's for tax liability only, of course. That way he doesn't have to pay taxes twice. He doesn't have to pay taxes, corporate taxes, and then whatever monies he earns, he doesn't, and on his personal return, doesn't have to pay taxes there. That way it's a pass-through organization, so whatever tax liability he would incur under the Sub S would pass through to his personal, and he would pay that way. Whereas with a Sub C, which he may want to do if he's taking his brother, other partners in, then the corporation would be taxed accordingly.
Let me give a chance over here to the other guys and then get back to you on the pitfalls of some of these things, because I think people need to know them, especially partnerships, which I understand are maybe difficult. Jennifer, the instructions that you provide through the county, do they also do legal overview in addition to the business plan and so forth?
Sure, yes. What we do is, we kind of start where Joe said of what they want to do. When we give them the basics of starting a business, the two main, talking about business structure, is really them focusing on how they're going to be taxed and the liability issues for starting a business. Because a lot of times we have a lot of people that just want to do a sole proprietor, because it is the cheapest way to go, but you have unlimited liability and responsibility. But we do have people that start there, then they decide, okay, now I'm ready to be an LLC or an S Corp. So we try to guide them in that way, where they can go online at sunbiz.org and get all that information, do it right there online.
I'm reminded that sometimes you really got to know in advance what you're doing, because I remember somebody trying to buy one of my houses that was for sale, and he had a sole proprietorship, and because of that, he had to go especially pay extra for a mortgage, because they couldn't figure out what was he really earning, because he had commingled everybody's money into that or something. But there are a lot of other issues involved in when you're just deciding to start a business in terms of the law you practice, David.
Well, one thing I wanted to mention about the distinction between these entities and why you choose them is, as has been mentioned, the question of limited liability is very important. It is easier to be a sole proprietor or a partnership, but the problem is that, again, it's more likely that people who are not incorporated are going to just run everything through one credit card, and they won't keep a separate set of books for their business and their personal use, and that can create a problem if they run into some problems later on where they get sued. If you're a sole proprietor, or even if you're a corporation or an LLC, and you don't keep your books separate, then you can run the risk that you're going to have your own personal
Liability?
own personal assets at risk, because there are ways in which the courts will sometimes say that, yes, in theory you have the limited liability of a corporation or a limited liability company, but because you haven't kept your books separate, you haven't actually operated that entity separate from your own personal business, we're going to disregard the fact that you incorporated that way. I have somebody who's actually across the street from me, and he's run his business for 15 years. He never ordered a corporate book, he never did minutes, he never did bylaws, and he runs some risk that if he gets into a bad situation and he ends up being sued, the court will say, well, you just, how are we going to know which is the business assets? How are we going to know which are yours? You just run everything together. And so he's running some risk.
They're not going to treat the corporation then as a separate entity.
Exactly.
I thought Romney got in a lot of trouble for saying corporations are people, but it is you are creating another person. In effect, are you not?
Without
getting into politics,
in some respects.
He didn't explain himself well, and had he done that, he probably wouldn't have had so many jokes against him.
For some purposes, a corporation can be considered a person.
A whole other person.
As a matter of fact, the Supreme Court, in the Citizens United case, in effect, was saying that corporations shouldn't be restricted in how much political contributions they can make, because because of their interpretation of the statute.
Joe, I want to go back for a second on partnerships. I remember going to an attorney years ago about forming a partnership, and he explained that more of law was unraveling partnerships, or more of his work was unraveling them rather than putting them together, that it was difficult to have a partnership. Do you find that that's true too, or
yes,
do they work out? Do you think?
Yes, I think it is. And oftentimes people will come and they don't want to set up a structure. They just want to say, well, I'm going to invest 50% and my friend's going to invest 50%, and we're going to be equal partners, and there's no writing. Or at the very least, they'll go to Sam's Club and they'll get the legal forms and just kind of fill them out. And of course, what that does is it's cheap in the short run, but very expensive in the long run when things ultimately do unravel and there's a whole legal battle that heads to the courts. It's much better to have everything put down on paper in an agreement, whether it's through a shareholders agreement or an operating agreement with a limited liability company, outlining the duties and responsibilities of each of the parties that are involved in it. That way there's
Get it out of the way right ahead of time.
Get out of the way ahead of time. Just
what are you going to do? You're going to file the taxes, and I'm going to get the customers or fill the order.
It also sharpens their initial view of what they're going to be doing. Sometimes they say, well, we're just going to be partners. We'll split it all up. And then when you actually put it on paper, I'll do this. Oh, I don't know if I want to do that.
I thought
but
you're
better at this.
Yeah.
So sometimes it presents problems in advance, because then they can more specifically say, well, I'll take care of this side of it. I'll be Mr. Inside, you'll be Mr. Outside. This is what this entails. This is what that entails. So it can be a useful tool in that regard also. You
talked a little while ago about covering trademarks and patents, and it's reminding me of the latest Dyson vacuum cleaner ad, advertising commercial, where they say nobody can replace this because he's got patents on every element of that vacuum cleaner. Like, I don't know how many. They named something like 100 and, I don't know, some big number of patents. And so when somebody's starting something and they do have a brandy new idea, what happens with that? And how do you distinguish what should be an invention or something that should be patented, or a name that should be trademarked? There are different types of protections for different types of intellectual property. If you write a book,
if you produce a television program, if you're an artist, I had an artist in my office this morning, then you write a computer program, that can be copyrighted. Copyrights protect original works of authorship fixed in a tangible medium of expression. Trademarks protect the names of businesses, their products, the services they provide, the logos that they use to identify their business and distinguish it from others. So that's why Coca-Cola is different from Pepsi-Cola. They taste pretty much the same, but people will ask for a Coke or they'll ask for a Pepsi. Those are very important brand names. Apple is one of the most important brand names, valuable brand names in the world. And interestingly, what name you choose for a trademark can be important also. So one of the things we do is we help search trademarks. If somebody comes in and says, I want to call I'm starting a new computer company and I want to call it Pineapple, then we might do a search and find out if there are other computers named Pineapple out there. And even if we don't find any, it's still a judgment call, because you might say, well, there's no specific pineapple, but there's an apple. And that might be a problem. In fact, there once was a Pineapple computer, and in fact, Apple did sue them, and Apple crushed Pineapple. So
how did they ever get the name apples? It's
well,
an actual
and that's
everyday fruit.
And that's interesting too, because there's a hierarchy of different kinds of trademarks. Some trademarks are what we call generic. You can't get a trademark on Apple for fruit, because that's what it is. But for computers, it has nothing to do with computers. So you can name, or at least somebody, Steve Jobs, could name his company Apple because it had nothing to do with Apple. Other good names are things like Xerox and Exxon, words that don't mean anything. Or suggestive trademarks like Everready for batteries, or Tropicana for orange juice. It gives you the idea of the tropicalness of
I remember
of
when I was freelance writing a lot that the magazines we'd hear not to call a tissue a Kleenex, not to call a copy a Xerox, because they were being now assumed into regular vocabulary,
right,
so
well,
that people could lose their...
You can lose your name. Aspirin's a very good example of that.
Aspirin?
Aspirin was once a trademark of the Bayer company.
Oh.
It still is in Germany, but in this country it's gone generic, and anybody can make aspirin.
Oh, what do you know?
Matter of fact, before I came over here, I was at the local drugstore, and I was behind a man, and he was at the druggist. He said, I like some of your monoacetic acid, ester salicylic acid. And the druggist said, well, you mean aspirin, don't you? He says, yeah, but I can never remember that name.
That's a good one. That's a darn good one. Okay. All right, so now, do you cover some of this as well with their need to speak to attorneys about trademarks?
Sure.
And
We always recommend that they do seek out the professionals, attorneys, bankers, especially when they are trying to trademark or patent. And I'm guessing, I've done some research, but I know it's pretty expensive. Is that true when you're patenting or trademarking?
Patents can be expensive, trademarks less so, copyrights even less so.
Yeah, I knew copyright, but yeah. So a lot of people they're not in that stage a lot of times when we see them.
David, about intellectual property, which actually includes all of these things, correct? I mean, that's the generic name over trademarks, patents, is it not? When people are starting business, a lot of times they either go to the internet or someplace else, look at their competitor and start fooling around with a name, as I think you were saying with Apple or Pineapple. Okay, I'm going to go off on this. What can they steal and not steal that's appropriate?
Okay. Well, I'm not sure steal is the right word.
Well, okay, borrow.
But you want to avoid conflict. You're starting a new company. You want to have a strong brand. You want people to remember your name. You don't want to pick a name that's very, like computer store.
Whoever thought of Google? What a brilliant idea.
Well,
but a
Google's
stupid
a good
little
name.
name when you think about it.
Google's a good name. It doesn't really mean anything. It means 10 to the 100th power, but it doesn't really mean anything, which is good. But now it means something, and that's the point. You want to brand it so that it doesn't mean anything, but by the time you're through promoting it, it means a lot. So you want to pick a name that's not being used by anybody else, that's not likely to create confusion in the marketplace, that you can perhaps build also logos around. Apple uses that rainbow apple, and then they also went off to Macintosh, and now it's Mac, you see. So if you can build a family of brands, Chevrolet used to have Chevrolet and Chevette and Chevelle and all of those. You don't really want to pick a name like Chevrolet did, which was Nova, which is okay here, but in Spain or Mexico means won't go. So you got to be careful about other languages too. Whole lot that goes into picking good, strong brands. But part of them is doing the search, making sure that you're picking something that no one else has, and also that then you can register that trademark with the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office, or even in the state of Florida. If you're just providing services in Florida or your product locally in the beginning, you can register in the state of Florida with the same division of corporations as you would register your corporation. So sometimes there's value in registering the trademark first in the state, and then as you go national with the Patent and Trademark Office.
And then as you go international, go
Well, then you
crazy.
can get registrations in other countries. There's no one registration for trademarks or patents that's good throughout the world. You have to register in different countries.
Have you had to, Joe, defend people who maybe were using something they shouldn't have used? You know, I know, for example, you just can't take Mickey Mouse and put him sitting over here on my shoulder or anything, or Disney will be after me in a minute. And it might not be because I didn't know. You know, a lot of people don't know that, right?
Sure, I'm aware of situations where there's a popular restaurant, and there was a restaurant in Tampa by the name of Cafe Pepe.
Oh, yeah, loved
And
it.
a long time it was established there on Kennedy, not far from where my office is now.
Right.
And when I was down in Miami, I saw a Cafe Pepe also. And of course you think, well, maybe it's a franchise, maybe folks have come down to South Florida to open the restaurant, but it was, they just assumed that they would open that restaurant with the same name and not have a problem. I believe the folks in Tampa sent them a letter, you know, hey, that's an established name, we've had it for some time. I don't know if they had it registered as a service mark or whatnot with Tallahassee, but I think there was ensuing litigation, and ultimately the folks in Miami had to change the name to Tio Pepe or something like that. But I'm aware of that. But as far as having to on the trademark side or service mark side, no, I haven't had to represent anyone in litigation in that
I
regard.
kind of remember when I started and ran for 20 years my advertising PR company that I had to get liability insurance in case any of us actually came up with an idea to market someone that we may not have even realized it came in our brain from some billboard we passed while we were driving along, and didn't have any idea that idea came from someplace else and we could have accidentally stolen it. Have you run into that, David?
Yeah, with trademark and copyright infringement, you don't necessarily have to know that someone has these, or a patent even more so, that someone has ownership in it. If you copy someone else's patented invention, whether or not you even know they exist, you've infringed the patent and you can be liable, partly because once the patent's issued, it's considered to be constructive notice. You're supposed to know at that point. And it's the same thing with trademarks. If you pick a name that someone else has and it's registered with the Patent and Trademark Office or with the state of Florida, you're under notice that someone else has that trademark and you can't use it. You're supposed to investigate. Now, copyrights work a little differently. Copyright, you must actually copy. If two people come up with the same idea or if someone independently of Disney had created Mickey Mouse, then they could do Mickey Mouse and the Disney people could do it. But once something's out there and if you copy it, now it's copyright protection against copying, not just innocent adopting of the same thing. But with trademarks and patents, it doesn't work that way. If you innocently choose somebody else's name without knowing or investigating, you can potentially be liable.
Jennifer, I want to get with licenses, since we said that was part of our show too. Now, to do business in our location, I know you need the city requires an occupational license. And
They call it now a business tax receipt, but it used to be
Oh, they
called.
don't call it occupational?
No, they like to change it up on us.
Okay.
So Hillsborough County, you do have to have a business tax receipt.
Unless you're a nonprofit like we are.
There you
We
go.
we didn't have to have one.
There you
Isn't
go.
that great?
Yes.
Yeah, we didn't have to spend that money.
Yeah, and they do. I mean, they start out around $22, so it depends on what you're doing.
But if you're in the city of
if you're
Tampa,
in the
you
city
need one for the
limits,
city
yes.
and for the county.
Yes, always county, and if you're in the city limits of Tampa or Plant City or Temple Terrace, you have to have their city license as well.
And that's to do any business.
Any business. It could be over the internet, at home, produce stand, whatever.
And you can get a license to do things from your home.
Yes.
Or
Yes.
Is there a
You can,
restriction on just like
kind
a
of-
zoning thing or?
No, not if you're just doing, I mean, you can't open up your home as a retail store or anything like that, but you can do any business out of your home. The main thing too is checking with your homeowners association, because they have certain deed restrictions on you when you're in a deed restricted community, and they can shut you down pretty quick.
Okay, so other than that, well, I know there's certain things like people who can't do hair at home.
Sure. Well, and one of the new things that you can do at home is this cottage food law, is now that you used to cannot cook out of your house at all. No food, that's illegal.
For consumption at a restaurant, you mean, or something?
Yes, like I want to go cater,
or catering.
or I want to make cakes, wedding cakes, and sell it. You couldn't do that. But now, back in July, the cottage food law came out. So now you can do baked goods in your home and sell it. So people, the cupcake craze, making cupcakes or cakes, they can do this in their home. They just can't go sell it. There are certain restrictions. You can't go sell it to Publix. You got to sell it consumer to consumer.
Oh.
But there is certain, now people can start in their home if they want to do baked goods. Anything that, you can't have anything that needs to be refrigerated.
Why did they prohibit you from selling to Publix?
Because they will not let you, they only let you sell consumer to consumer doing this cottage food law. If you went and rented a licensed kitchen, then you could sell to Publix and those kind of things. But there's probably about 15, 16 guidelines on what you can do with this cottage food law in your home.
Are there other openings that were previously restricted, or is this is new?
This is the newest thing. I mean, really, food, you can't, keeping children in your home, like say you want to do a daycare.
Yeah, there are people who do
Okay,
that, right?
yeah, even if you keep one child in your house, they're not related to you, and you're receiving payment for them on a regular basis, you are supposed to get licensed through child care licensing office.
If it's in your home.
In your home,
If you went to
one child.
somebody else's home and took care of their children, that would be different?
That would be different,
Okay.
because you're having actually an in-home daycare.
So I have no case against my grandchildren or
If they're related to you, yep, nope.
babysitting or anything?
No.
Well, they don't pay me, it's okay.
Of course not.
No money exchanges hand. Okay, so, but other than that, you guys need licenses or some kind of a thing to actually practice in the state of Florida.
Sure, we have to be members of the Florida Bar.
You have to be members.
And if we want to practice in federal court, we have to be licensed to practice in the federal court. And because I'm a patent attorney, I have to be licensed through the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office as a registered patent attorney.
Oh, you have a lot of different things depending on what you specialize in. I want to hear more about the other professions that require state licenses, at least. I don't think there's federal licenses involved in anything. But we're going to take a quick break and be right back. Please stay tuned.
I'm Candy Olson, Chair of the Hillsborough County Public Schools. You're watching the Tampa Bay Community Network.
We're back on Creating Your Own Job, talking about the law and licensing for people who are interested in starting or expanding their business. And I'm Louise Thompson, Executive Director with Tampa Bay Community Network, where you can learn how to put a show on TV yourself and get one on TV on this channel. And again, with us today are Jennifer Biles from the county, David Ellis, an attorney practicing intellectual law, and Joe Datto, who is in private practice on business and contract law. So we were talking about licensing and learning that in the city of Tampa or Plant City or Temple Terrace, you need a now called business receipts tax.
Business tax receipt.
business tax receipts,
Yes.
which used to be called occupational license. You need one in those entities plus the county, but in Pinellas County, the county doesn't get involved, and it's one of their, what do you have, 22 different cities and towns?
29, I think.
29?
And they each can potentially require a license, an occupational license, if you do business in there.
Okay, does the, now the state of Florida requires licenses for attorneys, architects,
Salons.
Doctors.
physicians, okay, and a whole host of other occupations, right? I mean, if you can't be a massage therapist or that's not a county thing, is it? That's a
professional license.
that's a state-wide thing?
My wife has 3 licenses. She's a psychologist, so she has a licensed psychologist. She's a licensed marriage and family therapist, and she has another license, school psychologist. So, you know, you can have overlapping types of, some of these licenses overlap, but if you want to do certain things, you may need to get more than one license from the state, as
So
well
you
as
have
an
to check
occupational
with the
license.
Department of Professional and Business Regulation, did I say that right? With the state to find out what occupations or businesses actually require a license. So it may not be to the person exactly, it could be just to the salon, but not the person, or the real estate office. No, that's a brokerage license, right? And that's usually with a person. Does it end up with a person always?
Well, there's brokers and there's actual agents who,
They need a license too.
they all need separate licenses.
And in
yes.
order to get those licenses, you have to prove different things, correct?
Correct. They have to take examinations, particularly real estate. The broker's exam is much more difficult than the exam that a regular agent would have to take.
Now, I remember years ago, when I first moved down here, which is over 30 years ago, that a lot of Florida wouldn't accept or they didn't do reciprocity with certain licenses. Is that right? Still true?
That's quite common, even with attorneys. If I moved here from Georgia, I would have to take part of the Florida bar, even though I had been a practicing attorney in the state of Georgia for a particular number of years.
Are there certain states they will be reciprocal with and not?
Yeah, the way it kind of works is the places where people want to practice, want to retire to or move to, like Florida and California and Arizona, they're hard to get into. I was admitted in New York when I first got out of law school, and then when I moved here to Florida, also over 30 years ago, I had to take the full Florida bar exam. I think in California you have to take 2 out of the 3 days. But if you want to move to South Dakota, they'd love to have you as an attorney, and they'll probably, if you've been practicing 5 years or more somewhere else, and you haven't been suspended or disbarred, they'll just let you in without taking an exam.
That's interesting.
Supply and demand.
Is that what it is? Instead of like, well, we have certain laws down here and we have to know that you know them. They're different.
They are.
Although pretty much our system all started at the, you know, with the same English law and then got modified.
The law is very different in every state, and there are reasons. I mean, it makes sense that you have to show that you at least understand some aspects of the law of the state you want to practice in. Now, medicine, I would think, would be a little bit different because, you know, medical practice is pretty much the same across the country, but even there are laws that affect physicians and other professionals that they may need to know that vary in different states in terms of what you can prescribe or how much, and, you know, there's various kinds of things. So even there, you have to be, most professionals have to be licensed.
Is there any requirement for the federal government to impose on a business? Outside of, I guess, maybe if you're selling meat, you have to follow FDA or something like that.
Yeah, I have a client that he's a mechanic, and their federal regulations he has to follow, particularly if he's going to change the oil on a car for an oil change.
He needs a federal?
Well, he has to dispose of that oil. He just can't toss the empty can or the full can of the dirty oil in the dumpster. There are certain regulations they have to go through. And there are state regulations for mechanics. They have to use a certain type of contract. They have to provide the client an estimate of cost to repair. There are different things in that regard.
I don't think that was a bad law, because sometimes...
That's for consumer protection.
Years ago, you'd come in and they'd say, oh, we're holding up your car
Sure.
for $900, and you thought you were going in for...
an oil $32 oil change.
Yeah, right.
Most of these laws are to protect the consumer.
Right.
And most of the licensors
Right, that
are-
seems so odd that they would have to have something that was federally mandated.
But
given-
airlines and trucking firms, a lot of companies that do interstate business need various kinds of federal licenses and authorizations and things, sure.
So if somebody wanted to open up a moving business, but they stayed local, they would just need where they
County.
were based out of county license, but they wouldn't need all those other things, right? But they could need them once they started transporting goods across state lines.
Possibly.
Let's talk about some pitfalls of when a person goes into business for themselves, early on, they make mistakes, right? Because we all need to learn. No, I know I did. And it's probably both dealing with a vendor or becoming the vendor or something, or myself and that kind of thing. Can you talk about some of the things you can get in, all of you, please jump in, that people get into trouble with that our viewers should know about?
Sure, a lot of things, and I kind of go back to the example of the two brothers in the tropical fish store.
Tropical fish is the big thing in our area, right? Isn't that the biggest?
Sure, they
next to bodies, isn't that the second biggest export?
Export out of Tampa
And
International.
I meant bodies, I meant people moving.
Yeah.
Actual people who die here but go back
Right.
to the cemetery of their originating
Right.
state, right?
Let's say our folks wanted to rent retail space. So now they meet with the potential landlord. The landlord provides them with a lease, which is essentially a contract, the agreement for a certain amount of time to pay a certain amount of rent. And they want to sign the lease as Frank and Joe's Tropical Fish LLC.
Right.
Well, the landlord says, that's fine and dandy, but I want a personal guarantee from each of you.
I hated that.
Exactly. Personal guarantees are always sticky, and people don't want to sign them. But looking at it from the landlord's perspective, his contract is only with the LLC, which may or may not have any assets. Were they to default under payment of the lease and he wants to sue for the money that he's owed, if he sues an LLC, which may be in trouble business-wise, may be going under, its assets were all the fish that had already been sold, no new fish had been ordered, for example, there's no other assets, then basically he would end up getting or looking at an empty judgment. But if he had the two brothers sign personal guarantees, then whatever assets they might have could be used to satisfy any judgment he would get against the LLC. So clients come in and they don't want to sign these personal guarantees, but by the same token, typically landlords are not going to want to rent space or enter into, or other business entities are not going to enter into a contract where they have a lot of exposure with just a corporation or with just an LLC. They want some type of personal guarantee. So in the event things do go bad, they have other ways to recoup their losses. So that's a biggie I see.
You want to add to that, David?
Well, one of the biggest mistakes that business people do, and I think it's the greatest reason why people fail when they go into business, is they're undercapitalized. They don't realize that in the early days of the business, they may be the best chef in the world, they may have the best food in the world, but it's still going to take a little bit of time, maybe a lot of bit of time, to get that restaurant up, to get some recognition, to get reviews in the newspapers, and for people to beat a path to that door. And they've got to have enough money to sustain them so that they can pay their waiters and their cooks and their rent and all the other expenses in the beginning.
And
everything, again, the telephone and everything else there is, for the first few months or whatever it takes before they turn a profit. And it could be several months, years even. And so most businesses that fail because, not because they don't have good products or good services, but they just run out of money before they have a chance to really make the business successful.
How does the county help them with that? Is there a way?
Well, and I think that's where we try to get those businesses before they start to write a business plan. Is because, like Dave said, they may be a good cook, but they don't know anything about business, about keeping books, about cash flow, or any of that. And that's what we offer for them, how to keep your books. Getting that business plan written so you actually know what you're doing. I do a lot of surveys of businesses or in people that come to our workshops, and they have a plan in their head, but they have not actually officially put it on paper. So they don't really have a plan for their future. what's that saying?
Yeah.
A fail to plan is a plan to fail.
Or
So,
something,
yeah, so we see that all the time.
I remember when I started one of my businesses, I went to an accountant and she gave me an estimate of how much I would need even if I weren't collecting income. I mean, even if I didn't need the business for income. And sometimes people can start a business and their spouse is working and go ahead, you don't need to bring in any money right now, but then how much do you need to take out of our joint savings in order to keep doing? So sometimes you start out with picnic tables for
Right.
a conference room table, as I remember doing.
They don't know their
But-
startup costs. They don't know how much it's even going to cost.
Well, you need a copy
them
machine,
to
you need
start.
this, you need that. That runs into
Yeah.
these personal guarantees. I noticed at one point that there was a requirement in order to get a line of credit for a company that you needed to sign personally as well, which means you're putting your house on the line, right?
Sure, the bank's not gonna let money go unless they're, they're satisfied that they can recoup that money in the event that there's a default.
So now we have underfunding, having to carry, I was just looking at pitfalls for folks so they make sure they look into them. This underfunding causes the biggest problem, but not realizing that they're also going to have to sign personally for some of the expenditures they're going to have. Are there other pitfalls getting into collection of money? I know I was in a service business when I was in advertising and PR, and I did find out that a lot of marketing people in that line of business went out of business because they didn't collect all the money up front. And the problem is, if I was creating a brochure for a client, he had to pay for the creative work, but generally I had to take it to the printer. And if he didn't pay me back for that printer, what was I going to do with these goods? Because they couldn't be resold. They had this ABC company on them. So I had to collect that prior to committing to the printer, or have the printer directly deal with the client. And I think a lot of businesses had failed because either they did it thinking they could trust that all would be
You have to
well.
have something in writing. I would suggest that they
But
set
even
up
if you had it in writing and that business fails, where are you?
have money.
I have a lot of clients with great ideas. They've come up with some great idea, great
Yeah.
invention, and they know they're going to make millions from it. And of course, they can't pay me right now, but they're going to give me a share. They're going to cut me in for a share, so that
Right.
when they make their millions or billions,
You're
I'll
gonna
get
get
a
a
big cut of
percentage.
it. I always tell them, well, I'm not a banker, and I'm not a gambler, and so I pretty much work on a fee-for-service basis. And usually that fee is going to be up front until I get to know them better. If they're successful, sure, then I start sending out bills. But there's no better way of going broke than by trusting your new clients. Not that people aren't trustworthy, but they often have inflated views of how well they're going to do. I had one guy come in and he said, the overall market for this sort of thing is there's 100, he says, everybody drives a car. We have 200 million cars on the road. And everybody's car has a little Framus in it, and mine is a better one. So if I get just 1% of the market, then I'm going to sell 2 million of these every year. And 2 million times $100, that's $200 million. So I'm going to be bringing in $200 million. And maybe he's right, but what makes you think he's going to get 1% of the Framus market of the country? He has no idea. He didn't do any market research. He didn't do anything other than these are the numbers he's throwing out in his mind. But he wants to give me a percentage of it. And I just find that that's not the way I work. If maybe his banker will like to take a shot at it, although I think it's fairly unlikely. But people are unrealistic often in what they're doing. And if you're the businessman, you just can't afford to send out lots of bills for people before you really know that they're creditworthy.
And usually you're in trouble before you realize you didn't set up your own business properly to collect that money. You
Even
wanted
in
to
that
add
situation where you've done the first part of it, you've designed the brochure.
Yeah.
And let's say you had quoted them a fee of $5,000 for the entire production. They said, well, we don't have it, we have 2,500 right now. Well, what you could do is, okay, I'll take the 2,500 up front now for the production part, and then before it gets sent to the printer, you're going to have to come up with the balance of that.
That's exactly
for
what I would
this
do.
For this crucial part, in other words, that has to be paid by a certain date. If it's not, then it's not going to go any further. So at least you got paid for the first part of your efforts. And then if they can't meet the second part, then obviously it's not going to get done until such time as they can do so. And if you have something in writing explaining that, that's going to ease a lot of misunderstanding and more than often than not get you paid for both parts of it. Because typically they may come to see you, we don't have the full $5,000, but we can come up with the first part by immediately, and the second part after Aunt Edna's estate is settled, we'll have the balance, or after our income tax refunds
After I kill my
should be
mother-in-law.
in, then we can pay the second part. Well, you need to have an understanding. I'll do the first part of it for you now, as you're paying me, and then the second part, as soon as you pay me, we'll complete it, and we'll exit this relationship.
Did you want to add to
happy.
that, Jennifer? It
Well,
looked
I
like
was
you
just
did.
thinking about it. Well, we have a lot of people that are starting. They have been doing this kind of business, but not really as a business. They've been doing it as a hobby for free for like their family or for their friends. They've been making those birthday cakes, or they've been being the handyman. And we have a lot of them that start and they're like, how do I convince my family members and friends that this is actually my business and I can't do it for free anymore?
Oh, that's
because they
there you
still
go.
want it for free. So trying to help them come up with a 10% discount or something for family and friends, because we have a lot of them not being able to put their foot down and say, this is my business now and I'm going to charge for my services.
And then again, too, like David, you were saying, you can, and I found this was true when I had my marketing business, you can find the most brilliant person who really can build a better Framis. But the problem is they don't know anything else about selling it. They haven't gotten a clue about what's going to take to sell it. They put their money in the wrong advertising vehicles, marketing products. They listen to people say, advertise on my TV station or radio, and that's not their audience, or put it in a newspaper. And so they make decisions that they really had no business making. They should just be making their Framis and maybe go someplace else like GM and sell them the rights to dealing with it and say, hey, look, I don't know how to sell it, but you guys could sell it. And
Well, maybe they can be Mr. Inside with all the great ideas, all the creative ideas and inventions, but then they need to get in partnership with or hire other people who can handle the financial side of things or handle the marketing side of things. People all have strengths and they have weaknesses. And you need to know that's one of the things when you're going into business too. Know your strengths and know either your weaknesses, either because you're not so good at certain things like math, or else bone up on things you don't know about. Take classes. The universities, and I'm not sure if your agency, but there's a lot of help out there for help get training in various things. If you don't know anything about accounting, maybe take an accounting class at the local community college. If you don't know anything about marketing, then either you hire somebody temporarily, or you hire an agency, or you bring in the talent that's necessary to support what you are good at. Different people have different talents, but nobody has it all. And a lot of people, just because if they've worked for a company all their life and now they're starting their own business, they're going to have deficiencies that they've either got to learn or they've got to find another way.
let's talk about the requirement for taxes, which is another pretty legal issue, right? I think a lot of people don't know where they should be charging taxes and how they have to pay the Department of Revenue, which I understand don't fool around with them ever. Isn't that correct? Don't ever fool around with those people?
That's true. If you don't pay your taxes, ultimately you could be charged criminally. And it happens frequently.
Well, okay, so
Or
who
big
pays,
penalties.
who has to pay the Department of Revenue? We're a nonprofit here, and there are a few minor things we have to do. If we do dubs for people, we have to, because they actually get the physical property, we dub their VHS tapes into digital format or something like that, then we have to charge taxes unless it's a nonprofit that hired us to do that. And then they have an exemption for that. But there are things we don't have to charge for, our classes, and things we do have to charge taxes for, and I don't know that everybody knows what they all are, because
Goods-
I've had
goods,
accountants
yes.
disagree over
Goods
what.
typically fall under the sales tax if they're sold, if they're retailed.
Goods meaning I can touch it.
Items,
Property.
cups, pens, widgets, what have you.
Tangible.
Services, there are exceptions to services. Attorneys don't have to charge or pay a sales tax. Physicians, but other types of services I do. It all depends, and is probably my knowledge of it is it's very exception riddled. So you've got to sit down with an accountant, or perhaps
I've
go to their
accountants
website.
disagree with each other about, oh, you need to charge it on this. No, you don't. I mean,
What I always tell people who come in and starting a new business, I said, okay, you need a lawyer. Hopefully you've got one. You need an accountant. And you probably need an insurance agent, somebody who will write the policies that will protect your business against various kinds of
you
risks. that
forgot the marketing person.
Well, they may be able to do that themselves, but sure, you
They
may
think so.
You may need these other minimum. You certainly need an accountant, because the accountant can help you set up your books, and the accountant can tell you what taxes need to be paid and when they need to be paid. If you have employees, you have to take out the various amounts that you have to take out. You have to file forms. There's just all kinds of things, and it's the accountants of this world and the tax advisors of this world who know that sort of thing. So you really need to do that right from the get-go, or else you take the risk of having penalties if you don't file on time, you don't pay the right amounts. You can have potentially criminal penalties, but
You
even
can go
more
to
than
jail
that,
if you take the money that you took out as income tax for an employee and not submitted it.
well, there's
Right?
all kinds of ways you can get yourself in trouble, both
Right.
in terms of the business, and if you don't pay yourself in the regular way, you can find yourself in trouble. And potentially, particularly with a small business, the owners of the business, if they don't properly take care of withholding and other payments they're supposed to, they can be held liable for back taxes and penalties. And the penalties sometimes are more than the taxes are.
One thing we see a lot is, especially in small businesses, they want to hire an independent contractor to come in, and when actually that person is really an employee, so they don't have to pay the taxes on them, and they're really cracking down on what is an employee, what is an independent contractor.
Somebody who freelances, you mean?
Yeah,
in
like
some
you
way?
hire somebody just to come in, do a job for you.
Right.
They're not on your payroll regularly, and you're not setting their hours. They're an independent contractor.
Well, that's a big thing, setting their hours.
Yes.
Yeah. Once they set their hours, that's fine.
Yes, so we have a
Right.
lot wanting to try to be independent contractors.
There are
When
actually,
we're
helps
there are
to
actually
have
a
a-
couple of dozen
have a-
criteria
Or
that the
name some of
IRS
them.
uses. Whether the person uses, whether they work regularly at their location or your location, whether they use their own tools or your computer or their computer.
Right.
If they're hired as a freelance photographer, they use your camera and it used to be film or their own.
Yeah, that's true.
There's
I
all
remember
kinds
that
all
now.
kinds of things
Yeah.
that the IRS will look at in trying to determine whether somebody is really an employee, even though he's called an independent contractor. Sometimes companies try to disguise it. They say you're an independent contractor. That way they don't have to pay withholding, taxes, and Medicare and all the rest of it. But if the IRS determines that, in fact, you're an employee, then that changes the thing. It also works in a copyright sense. There's a question, there are different rules in terms of who owns material when it's done either by an employee within the scope of his or her employment, or whether it's an independent contractor. I've had people who've hired programmers to do computer programs. They might spend $100,000, and at the end of the time, they think they own the program. It turns out they don't, because they don't have a written contract. So if you're doing anything that relates to material that can be subject to intellectual property, like copyrights and patents, then potentially having a contract or not having one can change the whole rules of the game in terms of ownership of that intellectual property.
Just as the name denotes, independent contractor, have a contract, have a written contract, so you going into the relationship, you have an understanding.
That it's a
of,
work for hire and
exactly.
not something else. It looks like we're down to about 5 minutes of time, and we may have neglected to tell our viewers something, or you may think you should emphasize something. And so I'm going to give you each a minute and a half to say whatever you think should be said. Jennifer?
As I said in the beginning, we do offer those classes on helping people with their marketing skills. And we do have counselors that can just help with marketing. And it's all free with the county. We do have people that specialize in creating a website for you, or bookkeeping, the introduction to QuickBooks. We have a variety of classes that we try to get out there.
You have a free introduction to QuickBooks?
We have an intro to QuickBooks.
All
And it's-
right.
Yes,
Yeah.
and it's really an intro.
Okay,
Okay?
good. All right.
But yes, we do that. And,
Okay.
you know, also you can also come in with one of our counselors, bring in your QuickBooks and let her help you go through that. So we offer all of those services that are free, you know, to
And now,
anyone.
it's all over the county that these classes are held, right? Did you say?
Yes, we're in all, we usually do them at libraries, well, but we
Okay.
do one by here at the University Community Center. A lot
Okay,
of our classes are there.
okay.
So yes.
So we'll run your website. What's your website? hillsborocounty.org
.org.
/
SBIC.
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 Okay, we'll run that at the end of the show. Thank you, Jennifer, for being here. David?
I think what this proves is that you just don't want to have to do it alone. If you're a sole proprietor, whether you're incorporated or not, or you're a small business, small partnership, there's a lot of resources out there. Some of them may very well be maybe free or very inexpensive. Other times you may have to hire a lawyer or an accountant or get insurance policies, hire marketing people, additional financial people. But it's hard to do it alone. Again, no one knows everything. You may be great at what you do. You may be a great chef or a great inventor or a great marketer, but you need to know that there are other resources out there to help you to fill in those areas you don't know so much about. So that's what you need to do.
Don't be shy, ask for help.
That's right.
Right. Joe?
Yes, I guess if there's one party comment I could make is get it down on paper. In other words, if you're a business plan, I think Jennifer suggested the county helps with those. If you're thinking about opening a business, whether yourself or with a partner, plan it all out. Set up what you want to do, plan out how you're going to do it, and plan out what you're going to use to get there. What type of corporate entity or business entity are you going to use? What understanding are you going to have with your potential partner or partners involved? And how are you going to market your product or your services? I think it's a good idea to plan everything out, and you can always deviate from the plan should you have to. But the bottom line is at least you have it on paper. You have an understanding, agreement with your partners, how you're going to do it. And I think that just simplifies it and makes it a lot smoother flowing than if you just start out and say, well, I might try this, I might try that. But if you have a plan that you can follow, I think you'll see a lot more success.
You're reminding me that when I sent the kids off to college that they would have a questionnaire for their potential roommate, which is sort of like a partner, right? You know, this
Certainly.
kid likes to party more, and this one wants to get to bed early, and they would try to match them up to people that would, but they had to put it in writing. They had to fill out a
Because ultimately,
questionnaire.
if friends go into business together and there's money involved, there's disputes as to money, they may not be friends for very long. But if they have a plan or a contract or an agreement, Mr. Inside and Mr. Outside, for example, or I'm going to do this and you're going to do that, and it's written down, there's a lot less room for dispute.
They can haggle it out beforehand rather than end up
While the business
having
is
to use an attorney to break them
ongoing.
apart because they never covered that subject. They just wondered if there was a questionnaire, you know, who's going to be inside or outside, and I guess they would leave that to the lawyer to ask all of that. Thanks so much for joining us today and relaying your expert advice. We are going to list all who you are, and maybe people can get in touch with you. And thank the viewers. I thank the viewers for tuning in, and we'll see you next time on Creating Your Own Job.